Hey everyone, welcome back to this chess video. In this one we have a must-know chess endgame. This one is really important, I think. It doesn't come up too often in a bunch of games, but it's a really useful skill to know because, oftentimes you get a same color bishop in an endgame, one side might have a pawn, and then you might have to know this position because at first glance this position actually looks like it might be a draw. At first you think that maybe white is winning because they have extra material. Usually a pawn is good enough to win the endgame. But here, the defending side actually controls the promotion square, and they can just shuffle the bishop anywhere along this diagonal pretty much, and hold the position. So it's actually not so clear how white actually makes progress here. So this is a really useful endgame to know. Now, I will say a few caveats to this endgame here. So first of all, both bishops have to be on the same exact color. If you have opposite color bishop endgame, that is almost always a draw. And that's going to be a draw because we have no way to force this bishop that's defending off the promotion square. Eventually we want to kind of force them off this square, but we can't do that if we have a bishop on, the opposite color complex, because there's no way it can kind of touch this other bishop and possibly trade it off. So that's one thing to note. The other thing is, this technique I'm about to show does not work for a rook pawn, and it also does not work for a central pawn. So it only works if you have a pawn on the B file, C file, F file, or G file. And in addition to that, our pawn actually has to be advanced far enough so it doesn't get blockaded. But if you have one of those situations like we have here now, then this is actually a forced win. So how do we go about doing this? So going back to a little history first of all, this endgame, this is known as the Centurini Position, and this actually came out from a chess study. This was from a very famous composer. He did a bunch of chess compositions, a bunch of puzzles basically, and studies, and that's how he became well known. His name was Luigi Centurini, really well known Italian chess puzzle composer at the time. And this study was in 1856, but he became well known in 1853 when he published a different study, and that's kind of how he got famous. So at this point in time, he's already kind of world renowned at this point. So this is the exact position that he published in 1856. And I think this is kind of a tough version of it, because our bishop is sort of inactive as far as what we kind of want. But even here, it is still possible for us to win. So in this example, I'll show how you do it from this exact position, how white can win. And right now we have this pawn on the B file. So it's kind of like on a knight's, file, because their knight would start here on B1. So this is kind of like a knight's pawn. I'll show it how to do that. And then in the second example, I'll show how to do it with the bishop's pawn, because it's a little bit different, but the technique is more or less the same. So, okay, let's actually get into this. There's a lot to cover here. Okay, so the first thing in this position is because this bishop is defending this, promotion square, we have to kind of force it off the diagonal. It's not that intuitive how we do that. So the key idea here is we actually want to wrap our bishop around and try and get it to the b8 square, which is really counterintuitive that we put it right in front of our pawn. But this is the key to, winning this endgame. So what we have to do here is reroute the bishop, maybe something like this, relocate it, try and get it to a7, and then eventually we'll get it to b8, and force this bishop off the diagonal. Because at that point, they don't want to trade, because if they trade bishops on b8, then we just take back with our king moves, out of the way, and then this pawn will promote, and they can't stop us. So that's kind of our game-winning plan, what we're trying to go for. So what we're trying to go for is this key square, the promotion square, with our bishop. So in this example, let's just go bishop h4, because it's furthest away from their king. It's most intuitive to do it that way, but we can see by the engine here, mate in 27 if you're stockfish. Bishop h4, also bishop g5, same number of moves, so it's not one better than the other. It's just more intuitive, move a little bit further away from their king. But if you went bishop g5 and then swung around this way, it's the exact same thing. As long as you know the idea, behind it and the kind of the plan we're going for, then you should be fine winning this endgame. So we're going to go all the way back to bishop h4, most intuitive. And so now they're going to move their king. And the reason they move this way is because they want to control this square. So they're going to try and plant their king on a6 just to stop our bishop from getting there. Because if their king were to do nothing, let's just say it sits there or it starts moving, away, then what's going to happen is we'll just get our bishop here for free, and then it's going to be very easy. So they'll make our job easier, but they're going to try and play the best defense. So they're going to move their king over. We give this check on f2, trying to go to a7. They stop us by playing king to a6. And now we have kind of the next junction in this plan. Because they have stopped us from, getting to this key square here, what we do is we try and get our bishop as close to the king as possible where it can't be taken. In this case, it'd be c5, because here, if we move to either of these squares here, then their king just captures us. So we don't want that. So I think best is actually just play bishop c5. And our plan from there, bit counterintuitive, but this is why you have to study these positions, we actually kind of want to relocate our bishop this way to e7, to d8, and then we might go kind of back to c7 if they allow us, maybe some kind of interference, cut off this bishop for the promotion square, or we might swing around some other way, and try and get to the b8 square like originally intended. So, kind of a complicated maneuver, but that's the idea behind this. Now, I will mention, bishop to c5 I think is best here. It's not the only move. I will say that if you play a move like bishop d4 or somewhere else on the diagonal and still try to go for the same pattern like this, it is playable, but it takes a little bit longer. And what happens is, if you try like bishop d4, for instance, they might have like bishop d6, and I don't really like that. They're kind of in between us, from our promotion square. It's almost like here, we'd love to play this, but it's almost like an interference. And so it just takes us a few extra moves longer, but the maneuver is still more or less the same, and this is still winning, so you haven't like blown the win. But for simplicity's sake, I think it's easiest just play bishop c5 so you don't allow this, and if they shuffle somewhere on this diagonal, that's not really going to matter because our bishop is kind of here and they're not really between us and the promotion square. Okay, so after that, they're going to shuffle somewhere on this diagonal. We're going to continue with our plan, bishop e7. Now they'll try and move their king back because we're no longer threatening to go to a7. So now they want to relocate their king back to c6. That way they can kind of control these squares and stop our bishop from getting there. So we continue the plan with bishop to d8. The king comes back, and now it looks very, very similar to the original position, right? Now here, we've only played 5 moves for each side. If I go back to the very original position, it looked like this. And if I go back to the position we're at now, it looks like this. So you can see it's very, very similar. So what have we really accomplished with all this shuffling? And the idea is we have moved their bishop, because back then, their bishop was here on h2, at the very beginning. And what's different now is because we forced their bishop up, it could be on any of these squares, maybe even closer to their king. Now we have the option of putting our bishop next to their bishop, which we did not have before because there's no I file. There's no other squares, to the right of the H file. So now, all of that, the whole purpose of that, was now we play the key idea of bishop g5. And it doesn't matter where they are. If their bishop was on e5, then we would just put our bishop here on f6. And we do the exact same thing where we're trying to force them off of this diagonal. Because, of course, they can't take our bishop, because then that's a deflection. And then all of a sudden, we just promote our pawn. We have a queen. And that should be an easy win. So they must remain somewhere on this diagonal and try and keep control over the promotion square. So next, they're going to shuffle somewhere. Doesn't really matter where, as long as they stay on that. And now, we come to e3, and we're once again threatening to come to a7. So we're actually making progress here. Now, I will say, if they were to go to like d6, for example, that is still fine for them. It's still equally losing, white is still equally winning, but I will say there is one plan that they cannot do if they go to d6. If your idea here is to like try and play like this interference and try and shuffle like this and try and keep your, the bishop, keep it out, that doesn't work, because if we play here and they try the interference, then we can just capture, the king moves away, and then we promote. So if you play bishop d6, you can't do the interference, you just have to keep shuffling somewhere on this diagonal, and it's no different than the main line that we'll look at. But okay, let's go back to kind of more or less our main line here. Let's just say they shuffle somewhere, their goal is not interference, so we'll play bishop to e3, they shuffle somewhere, and now we play bishop to a7. And now we're actually making progress towards our original goal, which was to get to our promotion square. So now they have to shuffle somewhere along this diagonal, the same thing. But now we finally get to the key square that we wanted. And the whole purpose of this is now this bishop cannot stay on this diagonal. Because if this bishop stays anywhere on the diagonal, we're just going to capture with our bishop, and that should be an easy win. We'll have a bishop, we'll be able to promote our pawn. Very easy checkmate from there. So now they are finally forced off the diagonal. So they have to go bishop g1. After that, we just shuffle somewhere on this diagonal. e5, is fine. You could also go to one of these squares, too. It doesn't really matter too much. I think e5 was sure to score the engine. And so the whole point of this, now all this little shuffling to their promotion square moved away, is now they cannot defend on this diagonal anymore, because our bishop now controls this diagonal. And so we've kind of switched places. So now the opposing side here, they are forced to defend with bishop to a7. Because if we promote the pawn and they capture, we cannot win the endgame, because our whole key is on this pawn. If we just have one bishop, this endgame is a draw. So we have to have the queen. So now that they're finally forced to a7, we kind of switch roles here. We play the other key idea, which is bishop to d4. And this is the entire plan that we had. All of this was to force Zugzwang in this way. Zugzwang is a compulsion to move, which is basically they are forced to move. Like if black could just pass and not move, maybe they could well, they can't even do that, because here if they just pass, we would just capture their bishop. But in other positions, if you could pass, like say their bishop was here to the left of a6, if there was more board left, they would just shuffle there, and they would just keep maintaining control over this promotion square. But they can't do that here, because, they have to make a move. And if you go here with the bishop, then of course we just capture it. So you're pretty much forced to take in our bishop. And when you do that, you're finally decoyed away from the promotion square, and we have forced promotion. So all of that was kind of the idea behind the Centurini position, and how you can force a win with just one pawn when the bishops are in the same color complex. So that was that first example. So now I'm going to show this exact same thing, a little bit of repetition here, but the difference is now we have a pawn that is on the bishop file. So here we have a pawn on the F file instead of the B file that we had, which was kind of like a knight's file. So the idea is exactly the same. Our goal is we want to push our pawn as far as possible, because if we advance the pawn, that just stops their king or bishop from getting in front of it and kind of blockading. If they can get a chance to blockade, like if our pawn was way back here on f2 or f3, if they can somehow blockade, then they're going to set up a defense, and this plan isn't going to work. So we start with f6, we just keep pushing our pawn. They can try and move their king up, we'll advance our pawn again. And their idea is the exact same before. Their defense is they're going to keep shuffling somewhere on this diagonal with their bishop and control the promotion square. And so let's just say they pick bishop b4, doesn't really matter where. And so now our plan is, unlike before, where over here we had these just kind of two squares in this diagonal that we kind of had to force between. Now it's a bishop's pawn, so we actually have three squares that we have to kind of control with our bishop and king to kind of force them out. And so what we want is, ideally, we want our king on g8, and we want our bishop on h6. Because from there, the king is going to control both of these squares, and then the bishop will be controlling all of this diagonal, and that'll kind of force the opponent out of that position. So it doesn't really matter what order you go with, but we have to move the king up to g8, and we also have to move the bishop to h6. So, just, play something. We're going to start with the bishop. Doesn't really matter which. They'll transpose. They keep shuffling because they want to keep shuffling somewhere on this diagonal, try and hold that. If they ever leave the diagonal, we just promote into a queen. So now we'll play king g7, continuing our plan. And they can try and relocate their king over here. It's not going to matter much. They could also still shuffle with their bishop. Same kind of idea. Here we finally get our king to g8. And now they go back. And it's like, okay, they have to keep, guard over this promotion square. It looks like we're not really making progress yet. But now we have our bishop here, and we can play bishop to f8. And very similar to the other, example we looked at, we're now forcing this bishop off of the key diagonal, because they can't take, because if they trade, then we just take back, and then we can move our king out of the way, promote our pawn, and it should be an easy endgame from there. So they are now forced off the diagonal, so they're going to try and defend here. Because if we leave, for whatever reason, they can try and come to h6, and then defend the promotion square that way, and kind of repeat if we let them. But we're not going to let them. So we'll shuffle somewhere back in the diagonal. They'll play bishop to h6. And now the difference is we actually have two ways to win here. We'll continue with our kind of mainline Centurini idea. And we'll just shuffle somewhere on this diagonal and kind of pass the tempo to the opponent. But I'll show the other one really briefly on what we could also do to win. So kind of real briefly, I'll show this kind of variation here, is we can actually also play bishop to b2. Unique to this example with the bishop. And the idea is we're kind of threatening this sort of interference thing right here, because if our bishop could go here, then, they can't trade because it's the same thing, and then I promote the pawn. So that's the kind of extra resource that they have. And so when they bring their king closer, well, now we can actually play bishop c1. And it's very, very similar to what we looked at before with the Centurini thing, where, this bishop is going to have to be forced off the diagonal. And so they're going to try and defend this way. But now the resource in this exact unique case, we just shuffle somewhere on this diagonal that we're safe. And as long as we shuffle there, this bishop can't move. Because if the bishop moves here, then we just trade, king takes, we promote. No problem. And what if they don't go there? What if they move their king instead? Well, the only king move they have that, doesn't like drop control over something, because they have to defend their bishop or we just capture. So the only king move they have is king to f6. And if they go king to f6, then very similar to what we look at, we'll have this, little skewer here, and we'll pick up their piece for free. But we'll go back to the main line. We'll kind of see the same exact idea in a little different way. But I think this one is more consistent with the Centurini idea. So here they're going to move their king over. And very similar to what we just saw, we can move our bishop to d2, decoying them off of the, control of the promotion square. First off this diagonal here. So, okay, so if we force them off that, bishop g7. And now we just play any waiting move on this diagonal. In this case, I chose bishop c1. Doesn't really matter where you shuffle to. And this is Zugzwang. They have no good moves because if they, move the bishop, we just capture it. Like if they move here, we take it, no problem. If they don't go there, like say they move the bishop somewhere else, we just promote. They have to keep control of the promotion square, and they quite simply can't. The best thing they have is they have king to f6, but then we play bishop b2, and when their king moves, then we just pick up their piece, and then this is an easy win. We'll just promote, and then we should have a winning position from there. Now I will say, in case you don't know how to win that endgame with, a queen and, bishop, like say they have a bishop, let's go back to the original one here. Let's just say, like in this exact position when we promoted, say they still have their bishop when they didn't lose it to that skewer. In this case, the endgame is really easy if you haven't, studied it before. All you have to do is you just keep your queen and king on the opposite color complex or bishop. So here their bishop is on dark squares, so we just keep our king and queen on light squares. And when we do that, their bishop is just useless, and then it's just basically a queen and king checkmate. Or you somehow find a fork, and then you pick up this, from like forking the king with a check and then picking up the bishop. So that's kind of the idea behind this endgame. I hope everyone found this helpful. So this was the Centurini Position endgame. Really useful to know how to do this with just, same color bishops and one extra pawn. And now hopefully you can win some of those positions in your own games. Thanks for stopping by, everyone, and I'll see you in the next chess video.